What happens when trust is shattered and betrayal strikes from the ones you least expect? Eleanor had it all: wealth, power, and love, until a devastating betrayal threatened to take everything away. But what if the real fight wasn't about revenge, but rediscovering the strength to rise again? Watch as she goes from heartbroken to unstoppable, uncovering secrets that change everything. But this story doesn't just belong to Eleanor, it's a journey we can all relate to. If you believe in second chances, resilience, and the power of standing up when everything seems lost, then you can't miss the ending of this journey. And if you want to see more stories that inspire, lift, and challenge you, then subscribe now. Join our community of fighters and never miss a moment of what's next. This is only the beginning, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this journey together. It was a dark, stormy night. The wind howled through the empty streets, rattling the windows of the grand mansion. Inside, the warmth of the luxurious living room did little to soften the tension. A woman, elegantly dressed in a rich, velvet gown, sat by the fireplace. Her eyes, usually sparkling with confidence, were now clouded with confusion and betrayal. Her name was Eleanor. She had everything: a lavish home, a prestigious name, and an empire built on years of hard work. But tonight, none of that mattered. Her heart was heavy. Her trusted companion, someone she had once called family, had turned against her. Just hours ago, he had smiled in her face. But now, he was gone, leaving behind nothing but the scent of his deceit. Eleanor stood, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her mind racing. What had she missed? Why had she trusted him so completely? As she paced back and forth, the storm outside grew louder, drowning out her thoughts. The windows shook, and the cold air seeped into the room, carrying with it the stench of betrayal. Suddenly, a knock echoed from the front door. Eleanor froze. Who could it be at this hour? She hesitated, then walked toward the door, her hands trembling. Opening it, she was met not by a familiar face, but by a young boy. His clothes were ragged, his shoes worn thin from the dirt of the streets. He looked up at her with wide, fearful eyes. "Please, miss," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "You are in danger." Eleanor blinked in disbelief. What could this poor child possibly know about her situation? "How do you know me?" she asked, her voice shaking. I know what happened," the boy said, his voice growing stronger. "I saw him. The man you trusted. He's working with them. They're coming for you." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Who is coming?" she asked, barely able to catch her breath. The boy's eyes darted to the dark corners of the room. "They want your money, your empire. They'll stop at nothing." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. She had always feared betrayal, but this was more than she could have imagined. Her thoughts raced. What had she built her life on if not trust? Now, everything was crumbling before her eyes. Eleanor backed away from the door, feeling the cold draft bite at her skin. But then, the boy stepped forward, his small, trembling hands holding out a crumpled piece of paper. "I overheard them," he said. "I know who is behind this. They plan to destroy everything you've worked for." Eleanor took the paper, her fingers numb against the chilled edges. Unfolding it, she read the names written in hurried, uneven handwriting. The words blurred in front of her eyes. It couldn't be true. She looked at the boy, her breath catching in her throat. You are telling the truth?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, his eyes locked with hers. "I will help you," he said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. Eleanor's mind raced. Here she was, betrayed by those she had trusted most, yet this poor child, this stranger, was offering her salvation. There was no time to waste. With trembling hands, she took his hand and pulled him into the mansion. "We need to expose them," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We need to make sure they never hurt anyone again." The boy nodded. Together, they moved quickly through the halls of the mansion. Eleanor's heart raced as she led the way to the study. She knew what had to be done. She had to take back control. The storm outside mirrored the storm in her chest. a mix of fear, determination, and rage. Eleanor and the boy worked quickly, gathering evidence, making plans. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. But Eleanor's mind kept returning to one thought. How had she been so blind? The boy's voice broke through her thoughts. "I know what you need to do," he said. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. He had saved her life tonight, but what was he truly after? In the end, it didn't matter. The plan was set, and by the end of that night, the traitor would be exposed. The storm outside finally began to subside, but for Eleanor, the battle was just beginning. She had been betrayed, but now, she was ready to fight back. As the storm outside began to die down, a heavy silence settled over the mansion, almost as though the world itself was holding its breath. Eleanor stood in the dim light of the study, her fingers clenched tightly around the evidence she had gathered. The boy, who had come from nowhere, had turned out to be more than just a child in need. He was her salvation, her unexpected ally in this chaotic web of lies and deceit. Her thoughts kept swirling in a whirlwind of disbelief and anger. How had she let herself become so blind? She had built an empire on trust, but it had all been shattered by the very people she had placed the most trust in. The room around her felt suffocating. The old leather chairs, the tall bookshelves filled with dusty tomes, and the fireplace that had once been a source of warmth now seemed like silent witnesses to the unraveling of her life. The crackling of the dying fire was the only sound that filled the air. But even that sound seemed far away, distant, as if it belonged to someone else's story. Her mind flickered back to the day she had welcomed him into her life, the man who had once been her closest confidant. Lucas. He had been her right hand, the one who shared her dreams, her vision. She had trusted him like a brother. But now, all of that trust felt like a cruel joke. He was never your friend, the boy had told her. He was just waiting for the right moment to strike. The words still rang in her ears. Eleanor pressed her palms to her temples, trying to clear the fog in her mind. She could hardly breathe, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest like 1,000-pound stone. How could she have been so wrong about him? About them? Her eyes flickered toward the boy. He was standing silently near the window, watching the now peaceful sky outside. His small frame seemed out of place in this grand room, but his presence was strangely comforting. "You're right," she whispered to him, her voice trembling. "He was never my friend." She couldn't shake the image of him, Lucas, his smiling face, his warm hand on her shoulder, his words of encouragement. How many times had he promised that they would grow old together, that he would always have her back? But in the end, he had chosen the side of greed and power. He had sold her out, and now it was up to her to stop him. The boy, sensing her distress, slowly turned to face her. His eyes were filled with a quiet intensity that she had not noticed before. "Don't let him win," he said softly, as though reading her thoughts. "You are stronger than him." His words struck a chord deep within her. Was she stronger? Could she rise from this ashes of betrayal and take back what was rightfully hers? For a moment, Eleanor felt a surge of defiance. She was not some helpless woman to be tossed aside. She had built everything she had from the ground up. She had sacrificed so much to get here. And now someone was trying to take it all away. "No," she whispered to herself, more firmly this time. "No, I will not let him win." The boy's gaze softened, as though understanding the inner battle she was waging. He walked toward her, his small, worn shoes tapping softly on the floor. "I can help," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "But you have to trust me." Eleanor's heart ached at the thought of trusting anyone again. Trust had been the very thing that had gotten her into this mess. But there was something about this boy, something pure and raw, that made her believe in him. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "What do we do next?" The boy smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We expose him," he said, "and make sure he can never hurt anyone again." The hours that followed felt like an eternity. Every moment dragged on, thick with suspense and fear. Eleanor and the boy worked quickly, gathering the evidence they needed. She felt a deep sense of urgency now. Every second counted. The more time she wasted, the more likely it was that Lucas would get away with his betrayal. But as they worked, Eleanor's heart grew heavier with every passing moment. She had lived her life in the light, surrounded by luxury and privilege. Now, she was living in the shadows, fighting for her very survival. It was a strange, terrifying place to be. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this was the only way forward. Lucas had underestimated her. He had thought that he could betray her and walk away unscathed. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the strength of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The boy had told her about the secret meeting Lucas was attending that night. It was a deal that would finalize the betrayal, one that would leave Eleanor destitute and powerless. But it also gave her the opening she needed to strike back. Eleanor took a deep breath and looked at the boy, who was now standing next to her, his eyes focused with determination. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm with you. Always." With that, they set off into the night. The mansion had grown eerily quiet again, and the only sound was the soft rustling of their footsteps as they made their way through the grand halls, down the dark corridors, and to the secret elevator that would take them to the hidden basement, the place where Lucas and his accomplices had set up their secret meeting. The basement door was heavy, the iron hinges creaking as they pushed it open. The air inside was thick, stale, and cold, and the faint scent of tobacco and cheap alcohol clung to the walls. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine, but she steadied herself. There, sitting around a large table, were the men who had conspired against her. They were laughing, joking, discussing the details of their betrayal. And there, at the head of the table, was Lucas. He was smiling, as if everything had gone according to plan. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels echoing in the silence of the basement. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she didn't let it show. The men turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from surprise to confusion. But it was Lucas's face that caught her attention. His eyes widened in shock as he realized what was happening. "You," he whispered, his voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I'm here to take back what you tried to steal from me," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm here to make sure you pay for everything you've done." The boy stood beside her, his small frame radiating courage. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice filled with quiet strength. Eleanor's heart was racing, but she was no longer afraid. In that moment, she realized something. She had been betrayed, but she would never let it define her. With the truth in hand and the boy by her side, she would make sure Lucas, and anyone else who thought they could destroy her, would never escape justice. As Eleanor stood there, staring down the traitors who had once been her allies, the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. Lucas's shocked expression was like a slap in the face, the realization of his own betrayal now sinking in. He had thought she would break. He had thought she would crumble under the weight of his lies. But here she was, standing taller than she ever had before. The room seemed to shrink around them, the shadows in the corners of the basement growing longer, darker. The air was thick with tension. The men at the table, all of them now frozen in place, seemed to be waiting for something, some signal from Lucas, some explanation, some lie to cover his tracks. But there was nothing. He was speechless, unable to even form words as his mind scrambled for a way out. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the cold concrete floor. Each step seemed to echo through the room, a reminder that she was no longer the vulnerable woman who had trusted the wrong people. She was a force, standing on the precipice of reclaiming her life. The boy, still standing at her side, had his eyes locked on Lucas. His small frame was unwavering, and in that moment, it was clear that the boy wasn't just a witness. He was a symbol of all that had been taken from Eleanor. His courage was the spark that had reignited her own. "Do you think you can just walk away from this?" Eleanor's voice rang out, calm but with an undercurrent of fury that was impossible to ignore. Lucas's face turned pale, and he finally spoke, his voice shaking.
"You don't understand.
This was never about you. This was about power, about control. You were just a tool, a means to an end. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She had known on some level that she had been used, but hearing it from him, from the man she had once trusted, made the betrayal all the more bitter. But she couldn't falter now. She had come too far, sacrificed too much. She took a deep breath, fighting back the surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. She would not cry. Not now. With a voice colder than the basement air, she said, "You were never my ally, Lucas. You were a coward hiding behind my success. And now, you've finally shown your true face." Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but she raised her hand, silencing him. "Don't," she said. "Don't even try to explain. Your words mean nothing now." She turned to the men at the table, the ones who had once been part of her inner circle, the ones who had conspired with Lucas against her. "You thought you could steal everything from me," she said, her gaze moving from one face to another. "You thought that by taking what was mine, you could have it all. But you were wrong." The boy beside her took a step forward. "And now, we make sure you never do this to anyone again." His voice was small, but it carried an unwavering certainty, a promise of justice that sent a chill through the room. The men exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, they began to look away, their guilt written plainly across their faces. But not Lucas. He was still defiant, still clinging to his arrogance, as if the walls hadn't just come crashing down around him. "You think you can take me down?" Lucas sneered. "You think the law will help you? I have too many people in high places, too many connections. You can't win. You'll lose everything, and I'll make sure of it." Eleanor felt the first pang of fear, but it was brief. She had feared losing everything once before, and it had nearly broken her. But not anymore. She had fought for everything she had, and she would fight until the end. "I don't need the law to take you down," she said, her voice dripping with cold resolve. "I have the truth. And the truth always wins." She stepped back, nodding to the boy beside her. He nodded back, the plan now set into motion. With a swift movement, the boy moved toward the table, pulling a small device from his pocket. Eleanor watched as he connected it to the computer sitting at the center of the room. The device hummed to life, and the screen flickered, revealing files, documents, and records that no one was meant to see. The boy had spent hours going through the information he had gathered. He had uncovered everything, every transaction, every dirty deal, every lie. And now they had the evidence they needed. "Are you ready?" the boy asked Eleanor, his voice filled with the same quiet confidence he had shown from the beginning. Eleanor's heart beat faster, the weight of the moment settling heavily on her. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's do this." The next few moments felt like a blur. As the boy worked quickly, pulling up files and exposing the truth, Eleanor stood frozen, watching as everything began to unravel. She could see Lucas's face, the horror and realization creeping in as he realized what was happening. All the lies he had woven were falling apart, one by one. The web of deceit that had kept him safe for so long was now crumbling under the weight of the truth. "Stop it. You can't do this," Lucas shouted, his voice rising in panic. "This will destroy everything." Eleanor's heart was steady as she met his gaze. "It's already destroyed. By you." As the boy pressed the final key, the screen flashed. The documents they had uncovered, the proof of Lucas's treachery, were now public. The information had been sent to the authorities, to the press, to the very people who could end his reign of betrayal. For a long moment, there was silence. Lucas stood frozen, his face pale and covered in sweat. His shoulders slumped, and the arrogance that had once defined him was now gone, replaced by fear. Eleanor took a step forward, her voice low but cutting. "You thought you could betray me and walk away without consequences. But now you will face the truth. And you will face the consequences." Tears welled in Lucas's eyes, but Eleanor felt no sympathy. She had given him her trust, and he had destroyed it without a second thought. With a final glance at the boy, Eleanor turned and walked away. She had won. Not just the battle, but her life. her power, her empire. She had been betrayed, but now she was whole again. And as she walked out of the basement, leaving the shattered remnants of her past behind, she knew that nothing would ever break her again. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a sky that was clear and endless. The boy walked beside her, his small hand reaching up to touch hers. "We did it," he said quietly. Eleanor looked down at him, a sense of peace washing over her. "Yes," she whispered. "We did." And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that everything would be all right. The world was full of betrayal, but it was also full of second chances. And this was hers. As Eleanor walked through the silent hallways of her mansion, the weight of the night's events settled heavily on her shoulders. The boy, walking beside her with an air of quiet confidence, seemed to carry no burden at all. To him, perhaps, it had all been simple, clear-cut. But for Eleanor, it was a moment she would never forget, a turning point in her life that would redefine everything she thought she knew about trust, betrayal, and resilience. She reached the grand staircase and stopped for a moment, her hand resting on the polished banister. The house, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a cold, empty shell, a place where her empire had crumbled. She could still see the echoes of her past, moments of laughter and love, of family gatherings and celebrations, all shadowed now by the betrayal that had cut so deep. Yet, as she stood there, staring at the marble floor, she felt something shift within her. Something powerful. Something she had not felt in years. Hope. The storm outside had passed, and for the first time in a long time, she could see the faintest glimmer of dawn breaking through the dark night. "You're not alone." The boy's voice broke through her thoughts, soft but firm. Eleanor looked down at him, her eyes meeting his. He was so small, yet in this moment, he seemed more powerful than anyone she had ever known. A part of her had wondered in the beginning what he wanted, what his game was. But now she understood. He had been sent to her, in some strange way, to remind her of the strength that had always been within her. He was the spark that had rekindled the fire she thought was long extinguished. "I know," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I've never been more certain of that than I am now." The next morning, Eleanor sat in her study, staring out the large window that overlooked the garden. The morning light bathed the mansion in a soft, golden glow, but the shadows of the previous night still lingered. The weight of what was to come pressed down on her, but she knew she had no choice but to face it head-on. The boy, whose name she had yet to ask, had slipped away before dawn. She had tried to find him, to thank him, but he was gone. Perhaps he had never truly been meant to stay. Perhaps he was just a catalyst, a reminder that sometimes, in the darkest of moments, help comes from the most unexpected places. The door to her study creaked open, and her secretary, Jane, entered with a stack of papers in her hands. "Miss Eleanor, there are people here to see you," she said, her tone polite but cautious. Eleanor turned to face her, her heart sinking slightly. She knew what was coming. The authorities, the press, the vultures. They were all going to come for her, for everything she had built. The betrayal was no longer a secret, and the world was about to witness her downfall. "I'll see them," Eleanor said, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "Let them in." The room quickly filled with the sound of footsteps and voices. 2 detectives, a couple of reporters, and an unfamiliar man in a sharp suit entered the study. The detectives were the first to speak, their expressions grim. "Miss Eleanor, we've received the evidence regarding your business partner, Lucas," one of them said, his voice official but tinged with sympathy. "We need to ask you some questions." Eleanor nodded, her eyes scanning the group. She felt an overwhelming urge to stand tall, to not let them see her falter. She had spent years building this empire, and now she would have to tear it down piece by piece in front of the world. But she would do it. She had no choice. The reporters were the next to speak, their cameras already trained on her. "Miss Eleanor, how does it feel to have been betrayed by someone you trusted so deeply? Are you going to seek revenge, or will you be taking a different approach?" Is this the end of your empire? They fired off one question after another, each one more pointed than the last. But Eleanor stood firm, her voice unwavering as she responded. Lucas may have betrayed me, but my empire is built on more than just trust. It's built on hard work, on perseverance, and that you can't steal. The unfamiliar man in the sharp suit stepped forward. He was tall, his face unreadable, his eyes sharp and calculating. Miss Eleanor, he said, his voice low and smooth, I represent some of your investors. They're concerned about the future of the company. We need to discuss what this means for the board, for your shareholders, for the future. Eleanor's heart raced. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. They were all here now, gathered like vultures, circling around her, waiting for her to fall. But Eleanor refused to let them see her crumble. She would not give them the satisfaction. I understand your concerns, she said, her tone firm, but I will not let one person's actions define the future of this company. I will fight for what is mine, and I will rebuild it, stronger than before. As the meeting continued, the weight of the world seemed to settle on Eleanor's shoulders. Each question, each accusation, felt like another blow to her already broken spirit. But something inside her began to shift. The girl who had once been too afraid to fight back was no longer the same person. The fire within her had reignited, and this time, she would not back down. When the last of the reporters and investors left, Eleanor collapsed into her chair, her head in her hands. The emotions that had been building up all night now came crashing down on her, overwhelming her. She had been betrayed, humiliated, left with nothing but the ruins of a life she had once built with love and trust. But even in the face of all of this, Eleanor knew one thing. She wasn't done yet. Hours later, as the sun began to set, Eleanor walked to the garden where she had once spent countless hours planning her future. The flowers, though slightly withered by the recent storm, still held an air of quiet beauty. In the fading light, the world seemed to slow down, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe. The boy's words echoed in her mind. Don't let him win. She had spent so long building her empire, but now, she understood something that had eluded her before. It wasn't about the wealth or the power. It was about the strength within her. It was about refusing to let anyone, whether it was Lucas or anyone else, take that from her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her reverie. She pulled it out, and her eyes scanned the message that had just arrived. It was from Jane. There's someone here to see you. A person who wants to help. For the first time that day, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't over yet. She wasn't alone. With a deep breath, she turned back toward the house, determined to face whatever came next. Because Eleanor knew now, no matter how hard they tried to break her, she would rise. And she would not stop until justice was served. Eleanor's heart thudded in her chest as she turned toward the house. The weight of the past few days felt unbearable, each step dragging her further into a storm of uncertainty and fear. But despite the overwhelming pressure, there was something else, too, something stronger. It was the same fierce determination she had buried deep inside her for years, the spark that had kept her fighting even when the world seemed determined to tear her apart. Her phone buzzed again in her hand, pulling her out of her thoughts. She looked down at the message from Jane. There's someone here to see you. A person who wants to help. A person who wants to help. Those words rang in her ears, but she didn't know if she could trust anyone anymore. The walls around her had been built on the foundation of trust, and now, those walls were crumbling, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Was it possible to trust anyone after everything that had happened? After Lucas? After the betrayal? But still, she couldn't ignore the faint flicker of hope in her chest. Perhaps there was a way forward. Perhaps someone, somehow, could help her find a way out of the wreckage. As she entered the mansion, the familiar grandeur of her surroundings felt foreign now. The elegant chandeliers, the polished floors, the fine furniture, it all seemed like a distant memory, a life she could no longer claim as her own. But she couldn't afford to linger on the past. Not now. She had to focus on the present. She had to find a way to take control of her future. The door to the study opened slowly, and Eleanor stepped inside. Jane was standing near the window, her back to her. The light from the setting sun cast long shadows on the floor, and Eleanor's eyes flickered to the figure standing next to Jane. He was tall, with broad shoulders and an air of quiet authority. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his face expressionless. His eyes, however, were sharp, calculating, but there was something else there too, something familiar. "Miss Eleanor," the man said, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. "I understand you've been through quite an ordeal. I'm here to offer my assistance." Eleanor froze. Something in his voice, in his presence, made her uneasy. Her heart skipped a beat. The last time she had been in this position, vulnerable, desperate for help, she had trusted Lucas. And look where that had led her. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understand," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, but tinged with suspicion. "And I'm not sure I'm ready to trust anyone right now." The man's expression softened ever so slightly, though there was no sign of surprise. He seemed to have expected this. "I understand. But time is running out. There are forces at work here, forces that want to see you destroyed. I'm not asking for your trust, Miss Eleanor. I'm offering you a chance to fight back. And I'm here to help you do just that." Eleanor's mind raced. Who was this man? Why had he appeared now, when everything had already fallen apart? Was he yet another player in the game of betrayal, or was he genuinely someone who could help her rebuild? She turned to Jane, who gave her a brief nod, as though signaling that she should listen. "What do you want from me?" Eleanor asked, her voice low, but tinged with caution. The man stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Nothing. I don't want anything from you, Miss Eleanor. I only want to help you get back what's rightfully yours." Eleanor's heart clenched at the words. Back what was rightfully hers. The thought of reclaiming her empire, of standing tall again after the devastation, felt almost impossible. But something in the man's gaze told her that he was speaking the truth. There was no deception in the way he held himself. There was only determination. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is David Carter," he replied, his voice steady. "I've been tracking the situation for some time now. I know what Lucas has done to you. And I know the people who are trying to take everything you've worked for. But I also know how to stop them." Eleanor stared at him, her pulse quickening. How did he know so much? Who was he really? And why was he offering to help her when she had nothing left to give? "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "How do I know you're not just another one of Lucas's men, here to finish the job?" David met her gaze, without flinching. "Because I'm not here for money. I'm not here for power. I'm here because I believe in fairness, in justice. And I believe you've been wronged. I've been in your position before, Miss Eleanor. I know what it's like to lose everything. But I also know that the only way to reclaim it is by fighting with everything you have." There was something in his voice, an undeniable sincerity, that struck a chord within her. He wasn't asking for anything from her. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. He was offering something rare, help without strings attached. Eleanor took a slow breath, her mind turning over the possibilities. She had been so consumed by her own grief and anger that she had forgotten what it meant to fight back. She had lost sight of her own strength. But now, with this man standing before her, offering a lifeline, she could feel the old fire beginning to rekindle. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'll listen. What's your plan?" David's expression softened, but there was no time for pleasantries. "We move quickly. Lucas is already making moves to cover his tracks. But there's a flaw in his plan. He thinks the world will stand by and watch him destroy you. He doesn't realize that you still have power. You still have allies, even if you don't know it yet." Eleanor's heart leaped. "Allies?" "Yes," David said, nodding. "You've built something here, Miss Eleanor. You've built a company that people believe in. And there are people, loyal people, who won't stand by and let Lucas take it all. But they need to know you're still fighting. They need to know you haven't given up." The realization hit Eleanor like a thunderclap. She hadn't given up. Not yet. And she wouldn't. David's voice brought her back to the moment. I've already set the wheels in motion. But we need to act fast. We need to expose Lucas for who he truly is. And we need to make sure the world knows the truth. Eleanor nodded, her resolve hardening. Then let's do it. The next hours were a blur of activity. David worked quickly, coordinating with contacts Eleanor didn't even know she had. They dug deeper into Lucas's network, uncovering more evidence of his deceit, his corruption, his manipulation. As the sun began to set, Eleanor stood by the window again, watching the world outside, her mind racing. For the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of hope. The man who had betrayed her, Lucas, had underestimated her. And now he would pay for his actions. It was time to take back everything she had lost. And this time, she would not let anyone stand in her way. Eleanor stood by the window, her hands pressed to the cool glass, her reflection blurred by the fading light of the day. She had always loved this view, the sprawling garden, the endless sky, the feeling of power that had once been her own. But now, everything seemed distant. The life she had built felt like a distant memory, like something someone else had once dreamed of. Yet, as she stared out into the quiet dusk, a small flame of determination flickered deep within her. I'm not done yet. The thought, though quiet, was powerful enough to steady her trembling hands. The past few days had shaken her to her core. She had lost everything, her trust, her empire, her sense of security. But somewhere, deep within the chaos, she realized something that had eluded her before. It wasn't the empire, the wealth, or the power that defined her. It was her will, her resolve, her strength to rise, to fight, and to rebuild. Lucas had stolen so much from her, but he had not stolen that. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. The message from David Carter flickered on the screen. We move tonight. Are you ready? Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Tonight. It was time. Her fingers hovered over the reply button, her mind racing. The plan was set in motion. David had been working tirelessly, coordinating with her trusted allies, those who remained loyal to her and her vision, even in the darkest of times. But the clock was ticking. Lucas was trying to cover his tracks, manipulating the system to erase any trace of his betrayal. Eleanor knew this was her only chance to expose him. One chance to take everything back. Am I ready? The question lingered in her mind, heavy with meaning. She had faced challenges before, but nothing like this. The betrayal had come from someone she had loved, someone she had trusted implicitly. Now, she stood on the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss. One wrong move, and everything could crumble further. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She couldn't afford to be. With a steady hand, she typed her reply. I'm ready. Let's do this. The evening was dark, the streets shrouded in shadows as Eleanor and David moved through the quiet corridors of the mansion. They didn't speak much. The air was thick with the tension of what was to come. Every step felt like an eternity, and Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, the sound of her own pulse deafening in her ears. The time for planning, for second-guessing, was over. It was now or never. David led her through the hallways to the hidden room beneath the mansion, the one where Lucas had made his deals, where the betrayal had been set into motion. This was where it would all come to a head. The room was stark, cold, its stone walls echoing their footsteps as they entered. Inside, there was a table covered in scattered papers, documents, and files, evidence of Lucas's manipulation, his lies, and his treachery. Eleanor could feel her blood boil as she looked over the papers, her hand trembling as she reached for one of the files. The documents she had once trusted, now exposed as nothing but a facade for his greed. David stood beside her, his voice low and steady. This is it, Miss Eleanor. Once we expose this, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to do this? Eleanor didn't need to think. She knew what she had to do. She had come this far, and she would not let Lucas win. I'm sure, she said, her voice unwavering. Let's make sure he never hurts anyone again. As they worked, gathering the evidence, David's calm demeanor seemed to settle her nerves. He was methodical, precise, and though Eleanor was overwhelmed with emotion, she knew he was right. This was their only chance. Just as they were about to finish preparing the documents for the authorities, a sharp noise interrupted the stillness. A knock on the door. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat.
It's too soon, she thought.
David's face turned pale as he turned to her, his eyes narrowing with caution. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll check it out." Before Eleanor could protest, he had moved swiftly toward the door, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. The seconds that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Eleanor could hear nothing but the thudding of her own heartbeat, the weight of the silence pressing down on her chest. Is this it? She wondered. Is this where it all falls apart? The seconds dragged on. Minutes. It felt like hours. But then, David returned. His face was grim, his eyes dark with the knowledge of something she couldn't yet understand. "They're here," he said, his voice tight. "Lucas's men. They've found us." A rush of panic surged through Eleanor's chest. Her breathing became shallow, her hands trembling with the weight of the situation. She had come so far. How could she let it all fall apart now? David placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Listen to me, Eleanor. You have to trust me. We can't let them stop us. We have everything we need to bring him down. But you have to stay calm. You have to be ready for anything." Her heart raced as she nodded, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. This was it. She had no choice but to move forward. Suddenly, the door burst open with a violent force, and two men stormed into the room. They were dressed in dark suits, their faces cold and impassive. But Eleanor saw the menace in their eyes. They had come to stop her.
To stop them.
David was quick. He moved toward the men, his body blocking Eleanor from their view. "You don't want to do this," he said, his voice steady, though there was a flicker of something more dangerous beneath the calm exterior. "Leave now, and we'll let you walk away." The men didn't flinch. One of them reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the weapon gleamed under the dim light of the room. David moved in a flash, his hand grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it with a force that sent the gun skidding across the floor. The other man lunged at David, but he was too fast. Within moments, both of Lucas's men were disarmed, lying on the floor, stunned but unharmed. "Go," David urged, turning to Eleanor. "It's not over yet. Get to the files. We need to finish this." Eleanor's body was shaking, but her resolve only grew stronger. She had made it this far. There was no turning back now. She rushed to the table, grabbing the files they had prepared, her hands moving with urgency as she shoved the papers into a bag. The moment she turned to leave, a voice echoed from the doorway. "You think you've won?" It was Lucas. His voice was filled with cold fury as he stepped into the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. He had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You've already lost, Eleanor," he sneered, his smile twisted with malice. "You're nothing without me." But Eleanor only smiled in return. "You're wrong, Lucas," she said, her voice firm. "I'm everything without you." With that, David and Eleanor made their way through the dark corridors, the weight of their mission pushing them forward. Eleanor's heart was racing, but she knew now that this was the beginning of the end for Lucas. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated the fire that burned within her. Tonight, she would reclaim everything she had lost. And she would make sure that no one, not even Lucas, could take that away from her again. As Eleanor and David moved swiftly through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, the world seemed to blur around her. Each step felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, but there was something different now. Her resolve had hardened. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to back down now. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind them, the unmistakable sounds of pursuit. Lucas and his men were closing in, but Eleanor refused to let fear take hold. She couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. The betrayal, the lies, everything that had been taken from her had built a fire deep within her, a fire that burned brighter than the fear threatening to overwhelm her. Almost there. David's voice was low, his pace unbroken. "Keep going. Eleanor nodded, her breath shallow. The papers she had carefully collected clutched tightly to her chest felt like the weight of the world. This was the evidence, the truth. The weapon she needed to destroy Lucas once and for all. But as they reached the grand staircase, a sudden, sharp sound froze her in place. A scream. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as the noise echoed through the hallway. It was unmistakable. It was Jane. Jane! Eleanor's voice broke the stillness, her legs moving before her mind could catch up. She ran toward the source of the sound, her breath ragged in her throat. David, too, reacted immediately, turning on his heel, his expression grim. "They've got her," David muttered, a quiet anger behind his words. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears. Jane had been nothing but loyal to her, her trusted secretary, the one person who had stood by her even when the world was crumbling. To think that Lucas would use her as leverage, it made her blood run cold.
No.
"We can't let them hurt her," Eleanor said, her voice sharp and desperate. David grabbed her arm gently, his grip firm but not forceful. "We're not going to let anything happen to her. But we need to move fast. If they're using her as bait, they'll expect us to make a move. We need to outsmart them." But Eleanor's heart was already set. Jane had been there for her through everything. Now, it was her turn to save Jane. "I'm going," Eleanor said, pulling her arm free. "I'm going to get her." "Eleanor, wait," David said, stepping in front of her. "We have no time. If you walk into that trap, you're walking into their hands. Let me handle this." But Eleanor's eyes were wild with a fierce determination. "You don't understand. I won't leave her behind. Not again. You don't know what she means to me." David studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if weighing the risks. Then, with a sharp nod, he stepped aside. "We go together, then."
Quickly.
"Stick to the shadows." Eleanor didn't need any more words. She was already moving. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but her mind was clear, focused on one thing: getting to Jane. She could hear shouting in the distance, the sound of men's voices echoing through the hallways. They rounded the corner and came upon the back office, the door slightly ajar. From within, Eleanor could see shadows moving. She could hear Jane's voice, weak, trembling but unmistakable. "I won't tell you anything," Jane was saying, her voice shaking but full of defiance. "You can't do this to her. You'll regret it." Eleanor's heart surged at the sound of Jane's bravery. She had always known Jane was strong, but to hear her hold her ground in the face of danger was something that struck Eleanor deeper than anything else. She moved forward cautiously, staying low, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. David was right behind her, his every movement calculated, silent. They reached the door, and Eleanor's hand hovered over the handle. She could hear the men inside, two of Lucas's hired goons, from the sound of their voices. One of them was holding Jane, his hand clamped around her wrist. The other was pacing back and forth, agitated. "You're wasting our time," the first man said. "The boss said he wants them both dealt with tonight." Eleanor's heart clenched. Tonight. This was it. The moment of truth. But she wasn't going to let Lucas win. Not now, not ever. "Tell me where she is," the second man demanded, his voice rising. "Tell me where Lucas is hiding. Or your little friend gets it." Jane's voice was quiet, but Eleanor could hear the determination in her words. "I don't know anything. I don't care about Lucas. But you'll regret this." Eleanor's heart ached as she silently pushed the door open. The men inside turned at the sound, their faces twisted with surprise and anger. "Let her go," Eleanor shouted, stepping into the room. The papers she had gathered still clutched tightly to her chest. Her voice was steady, despite the rush of emotions coursing through her. The men froze, their eyes flickering to her, then to the papers she held. The realization dawned too quickly. They had been waiting for this moment. "You think you can just walk in here and take her back?" the first man sneered, his hand tightening on Jane's wrist. Jane winced, but she didn't cry out. She just stared defiantly at the men. "I can and I will," Eleanor said, stepping forward. You've been paid to do this, but you're making a mistake. Lucas has betrayed everyone. He's betrayed you too. The second man laughed, the sound echoing through the room like a sick joke. You really think you can turn us against him? Lucas is our boss. He's the one who pays us. And now you're nothing. Just a woman trying to hang on to whatever scraps you have left. Eleanor's hand tightened on the papers, her knuckles white. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. You're wrong. It's over.
He's done.
And when the world finds out what he's done, he won't be able to run far enough to hide. The first man looked at the papers in Eleanor's hands and then back at her, his expression darkening. You're bluffing. No, Eleanor said, her voice ice-cold. I'm not bluffing. I have the proof to destroy him. You want to be his pawn? You want to die for him? Then go ahead. But if you leave here with Jane, you'll never be able to live with yourselves. For a long moment, the room was dead silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. David moved quietly behind Eleanor, his presence like a shadow, waiting for the slightest move. Finally, the first man let out a low growl, his grip on Jane loosening as his eyes flicked to the door. He seemed to consider his options for a moment, then looked at the second man, who seemed just as uncertain.
Move.
Now, David's voice rang out, calm but deadly, and the men hesitated for just a heartbeat longer. And then they were gone. Eleanor rushed to Jane, pulling her into a fierce embrace. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking as Jane returned the hug, her hands trembling. We'll get through this, Jane said softly, her voice steady. Together. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of everything she had lost, Eleanor realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who cared for her, people who would fight by her side. The fight wasn't over. But as long as she had the truth, and as long as she had them, she knew that, for the first time in days, she would win. The quiet hum of the city outside the mansion windows seemed distant now, a world far removed from the chaos and betrayal that had unfolded within these walls. The tension that had gripped Eleanor's heart for so long had finally started to loosen, but she knew the battle wasn't truly over yet. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, Eleanor stood in the same room where it had all begun. The papers, Lucas's secrets, his lies, were spread out before her, each one a testament to the strength she had found in herself. The truth was finally in her hands, and she would make sure it was seen by the world. Behind her, Jane was quietly speaking to the authorities, handing over everything they had uncovered. The final pieces were falling into place. The police were already en route to arrest Lucas, his empire built on lies and manipulation about to come crashing down around him. Eleanor had done it. She had fought for what was hers. And most importantly, she had saved the people she cared about. David stood quietly by the door, watching her, his expression unreadable. You did it, he said softly, his voice tinged with admiration. You really did. Eleanor didn't look at him. She could feel the weight of his gaze, but there was something else beneath the surface. She had fought with everything she had, but in the process, she had rediscovered something even more important than victory. She had rediscovered who she was. I couldn't have done it without you, Eleanor replied, her voice quiet but filled with gratitude. Without you, I would have lost everything. You gave me the strength to keep going when I thought I couldn't. David stepped closer, his footsteps light, yet deliberate. Strength was always inside you, Eleanor. You just needed to remember how to reach for it. She smiled, a small, knowing smile, as if she finally understood. It wasn't just about the empire or the wealth. It was about the strength to rise again, to stand tall after everything had been ripped away from her. She had learned the hard way that sometimes the most important battles were the ones fought within. But what about you? She asked, turning to face him. Why help me? Why risk everything? David's eyes softened, a shadow of something unspoken passing through them. Some things you don't ask for, Eleanor. Sometimes you just know what's worth fighting for. And you, your story, your strength, was always worth fighting for. There was a long, charged silence between them, filled with words that neither of them had said yet, but both felt deeply. And as that silence stretched on, Eleanor realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The final moments unfolded like a dream. Eleanor sat at her desk, watching the sun climb higher into the sky, painting the room in shades of gold. She had reclaimed her life, her empire, and her peace of mind. But the most important thing was that she had done it on her own terms. The door creaked open, and Jane stepped in, her face flushed but smiling. She held a fresh cup of tea in her hands, offering it to Eleanor with a quiet, knowing smile. "We did it," Jane said, her voice filled with quiet triumph. "We really did." Eleanor took the cup with a grateful nod, savoring the warmth that spread through her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of everything that had been lost, everything that had been gained, fall away, leaving her with a sense of calm she hadn't known was possible. And then, the sound of footsteps interrupted the moment, and Eleanor's phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it. It was a video of Lucas. His face was gaunt, his expression hollow as he sat in a cell, looking more defeated than she had ever imagined possible. The message read, "The world is watching. You can't hide from the truth." Eleanor watched as the video played, the final pieces of her journey coming together. The world would know what Lucas had done. The truth had been set free. The fight was over. But this was just the beginning. Later that night, Eleanor stood on the balcony, watching as the lights of the city flickered below her. She felt different now, as though she were seeing everything with new eyes. The struggle, the pain, it had all led her to this moment. She had lost so much, but she had also gained something far more valuable. The knowledge that she could stand alone. She could rebuild. "I'm not done yet," she whispered to the night, her voice steady, filled with a quiet strength. And just like that, the world outside seemed a little brighter. As the camera slowly panned out, showing Eleanor standing tall against the backdrop of her mansion, a soft voice broke through the silence. If you've followed Eleanor's journey, if you've witnessed her rise from the ashes and reclaimed her empire, then you know what true strength looks like. But this story isn't just about her. It's about all of us, finding the strength to rise when we've been knocked down. It's about reclaiming our lives, no matter how dark it may seem. But the journey doesn't end here. We've only just begun. If you believe in the power of second chances, if you believe in the strength of the human spirit, then this story is for you. And if you want to be a part of the journey, if you want to see more stories of resilience, of courage, and of hope, then make sure you subscribe to our channel. Because we're just getting started. Together, we'll keep fighting, keep rising, and keep winning. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe now and be part of the story. Because sometimes the greatest battles lead to the most unforgettable victories. As the screen faded to black, the sound of a soft melody played, leaving behind the final, lingering thought that no matter how hard life gets, the story was never over. And with that, Eleanor's story was etched into the hearts of everyone who had watched, a reminder that nothing could stop the strength of the human spirit and that the best was yet to come.
Subscribe. Keep fighting.
Keep rising.